The smell hit me before anything else did. Not the bunker smell, that came later. I mean the smell from outside. From up the hill where the Pattersons had 3 dogs and a chicken coop. That morning, it was something wrong in the air. Like when you leave raw chicken out too long and you don't notice it right away, but then you do, and you can't stop noticing it. Except this was bigger. Like something the size of a neighborhood had been left out. I didn't think much of it. I was elbow deep in a '97 Chevy pickup that belonged to Dale Hoffmeister, who'd been coming to our shop since before I was born. The left rear brake caliper was seized so bad it had basically fused to the rotor, and I'd been fighting it for 2 days. Grandpa was somewhere inside the farmhouse, making coffee and arguing with the radio the way he always did in the mornings. That was my life. Me, the shop, the truck, Grandpa yelling at AM talk radio. I was 23. I'd done a semester and a half at State University studying mechanical engineering before I realized I hated lecture halls and liked engines and came back home. My mom, Grandpa's daughter, had moved to Portland years before to be with her boyfriend, who was now her husband, and I talked to her maybe twice a month, if that. My dad was a different story, or really not much of a story at all. He left when I was 4. I had a handful of people I'd call friends in town, mostly guys I'd gone to high school with, most of whom had also stayed. That was Garfield Creek, Wyoming. Population just under 2,000, if you were generous about the edges. The shop was technically called Kowalczyk and Sons Auto Repair, which was funny because there was only one son, and that was Grandpa, whose name was Walter Kowalczyk, and he'd inherited it from his own father, who'd built it in 1952. The "and Sons" was just something they kept because changing the sign cost money, and Grandpa saw no reason to spend money on a sign when the people who needed to know where the shop was already knew. My name is Ray Kowalczyk. Nobody called me Raymond except Grandpa when he was annoyed at me, which was often enough that I heard the full version of my name more than most people. So, that morning, I was fighting Dale's caliper. The radio in the shop was on some classic rock station out of Casper, and Grandpa came out with 2 mugs of coffee and set one on the workbench near my elbow and said, "Something's off." I looked up. His face was doing a thing it didn't usually do. He was 78 years old, my grandfather, and his face had settled into a kind of permanent set expression over the decades. Not mean, just solid. Like a face that had decided a long time ago it wasn't going to waste energy on unnecessary movement. But right now it was uncertain. That was new. "The radio," I said. "Before the radio." He looked up the hill toward the Pattersons' place. "Thelma Patterson's dogs have been at it since 4 this morning, all 3 of them. They don't usually go that long." I hadn't noticed. I sleep hard. I sleep like someone who spends 8 hours a day doing physical work, which I do. "Coyote, maybe?" I said. "Maybe." He handed me the mug. "Radio's saying something about road closures in Sheridan. Illness-related. That's the word they're using. Illness." I drank my coffee. Could be a lot of things. Could be. He went back inside. I went back to Dale's caliper. By 10 in the morning, the dogs up at the Pattersons had stopped. I remember that specifically, not because dogs stopping barking is unusual, but because of the way they stopped. All at once. Like someone had hit a switch. The radio went to emergency broadcast at 10:47. I remember the exact time because I just checked my phone to see how much of the morning was left. The emergency broadcast tone is a specific sound. Everyone knows it, and nobody likes it. It came through the shop speakers, and I straightened up with the wrench still in my hand and listened. The voice was calm in that specific way that means whoever's reading the script is actively working to keep their voice calm. Confirmed outbreak of unknown origin. Multiple counties in Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota. Do not approach individuals displaying erratic behavior, open wounds, or signs of neurological distress. Shelter in place. Await further instruction. I stood there with a wrench. Grandpa was in the doorway of the shop. He didn't look panicked. He looked like a man who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has just been told it's arrived. "Walter," I said, because I used his first name sometimes. "What do we do?" He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. "Get the truck. Drive down to Faulkner's and get as much canned food as they'll sell you. Pay cash. Come straight back. Don't stop for anything and don't talk to anyone longer than you have to." Faulkner's was our grocery store. It was also our hardware store and feed store. 3 businesses under one roof, the way things worked in small towns. "And after?" I said. He looked at me in a way I couldn't fully read. "After, I show you something." I took the shop truck, a beat-up F-15. Oh, that ran better than it looked because I kept it that way. I drove the 3 miles into town. The main street was quiet in a weird way. Some people out, some cars moving, but everyone doing this thing where they were moving with too much purpose, like they'd all gotten the same message at the same time and were deciding separately how worried to be. Faulkner's had maybe 15 people inside. Donna Faulkner, who was 70 and had worked the register for 30 years, looked at me when I came through the door and said, "Heard the broadcast?" "Yeah," I said. "Taking it seriously, are you?" "Grandpa says to take it seriously." She nodded. "Take what you need. I'll run your card." I took canned food, beans, corn, tomatoes, soup, fruit, dry goods, rice, 2 kinds of pasta, salt and sugar and coffee because Grandpa would genuinely rather starve than go without coffee. Candles, batteries, a first aid kit that was better than ours. I loaded 4 boxes into the truck bed, and Donna ran everything without a word about price or quantity. At the door, I stopped. "Donna, you should think about getting somewhere safe." She looked at me across the register. "This is somewhere safe, Ray. My father built this building. I'm not going anywhere." I drove back. The smell on the air was worse. When I got to the farm, Grandpa had already started moving things around in the workshop attached to the back of the house. Not the car shop, but the old agricultural workshop. The one with the tools and seed stock and the kind of equipment that doesn't really change much from one generation to the next. He was pulling a workbench away from the wall. A big, heavy workbench. He was pulling it like it was on wheels. It was on wheels. Hidden wheels, recessed into the legs, and the floor under the bench was scored in a rectangle that I'd looked at my entire life and thought was just an old drain cover or a seam in the concrete. It wasn't. Under the bench was a hatch. Steel, painted gray, with a recessed handle and a combination lock that looked military. Looked old. Grandpa was turning the dial. I put down the boxes. "Walter." "I'll explain below," he said. The lock opened. He lifted the hatch, and warm, stale air came up from underneath. Not bad, not rotten, just old. Compressed. Like a room that had been breathing to itself for decades. There was a ladder. "You first," he said. "Turn on the lights when you get down. Switch is on your left." I went down. The ladder was maybe 15 feet. Metal rungs, solid, they didn't flex at all. At the bottom, my left hand found the switch and I hit it, and fluorescent lights came on in sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Down a corridor that stretched maybe 40 feet before opening into something larger. I walked the corridor. The walls were concrete block, thick, and there were pipes running along the ceiling with labels on them. Water, air, power, all labeled in stencil. Military stencil, the kind you see on old equipment. The room at the end was maybe 30 by 40 feet. Shelves along 3 walls, most of them holding sealed containers and crates. A folding table in the center. Chairs, stacked. 2 military cots folded against one wall. And at the far end, a door that led to what turned out to be a small bathroom with a composting toilet and a hand pump sink. And next to that, another door, smaller, that held the mechanical room, a generator, a fuel tank, filters, the kind of infrastructure you'd need if you were planning to live underground for a while. Grandpa came down the ladder behind me. I heard him breathing a little heavier from the effort. "When?" I said. "Started construction in 1962, he said. "Finished in 64. Cuban Missile Crisis got people thinking. I was young then, working a government contract. Part of what I was doing was helping site these. Site these. There are others, not many, not anymore. Most got decommissioned or forgotten. This one I kept." I turned around to look at him. "You've been sitting on a Cold War bunker under the workshop my whole life. Your whole life, and then some. Why didn't you tell me?" He sat down in one of the folding chairs and put his hands on his knees. "Because I hoped I'd never need to. Every decade it didn't get used felt like a reason not to bring it up. What's the point of telling a kid there's a bomb shelter under his house? Makes for weird childhood conversations." He looked at the shelves. "The supplies I've been rotating out every few years. The generator's been serviced. Fuel tank's got about 60 gallons in it, which is rationed use, not full-time power." I stood in the middle of the room, trying to reorient myself. The whole morning was trying to sort itself into something I could hold. The broadcast, the smell, the dog stopping. And now this. "Okay," I said. "Okay. What do we do?" "We bring down what you bought. Then I need to think about the Henderson family down the road. Jim Henderson's wife is 8 months pregnant, and they don't have anywhere to go. And maybe Pete Daller. He's alone, and he's older." I went back up the ladder. We spent the next 4 hours moving. Food first, everything I'd bought. Then Grandpa's personal supplies, which were more extensive than I'd realized. He'd been quietly storing canned goods in the farmhouse basement for years, and now I understood why. Water containers, medical kit, tools, extra clothing, a hand-crank radio, books, a small stack of them, a shotgun and 2 boxes of shells. My grandfather was not a gun person by nature, but he'd grown up when being a gun person in Wyoming was just being a person in Wyoming, and somewhere in the back of his closet that shotgun had lived for 20 years. I drove the truck down to the Henderson place at around 3 in the afternoon. The sky had changed. There was smoke to the southeast, not a lot, a thin column, but it hadn't been there that morning. And on the drive, I passed the entrance to the Patterson farm, and the gate was open and wrong. The truck was still in the driveway, but the front door of the house was wide open. And even from the road, there was something about the way it looked that I didn't want to look at more closely. I knocked on the Hendersons' door. Jim opened it. He was 34, an electrician, big guy, grew up here like I did. Behind him, I could see his wife, Kathy, and Grandpa was right. She was enormous with the pregnancy, late enough that you could see it was very close. There was also a kid I hadn't expected. Jim's nephew, Tyler, who was maybe 16 and had apparently been staying with them for the summer from what Jim briefly explained. "You heard the broadcast?" I said. Been hearing it, Jim said. Grandpa has a place, secure, underground. You need to come. Jim and Kathy exchanged a look, the kind of look that has a whole conversation in it. How secure, Kathy said. Built in 1964 for nuclear fallout. Concrete walls, generator, water, food. It's the real thing. They were packed and in the truck inside 20 minutes. Pete Daller was my next stop. Pete was 69, a retired mail carrier, lived by himself since his wife Claire passed. He had a dog, a slow arthritic beagle named Biscuit. He came to the door with the dog under his arm and said, "I was wondering if someone was going to come get me." Of course someone was, I said. And I wasn't sure if that was true, but it felt like the right thing to say. I got them back to the farm. By the time I pulled in, Grandpa had also called on the landline, which was still working. A woman named Ruth Albrecht, who worked at the high school and lived half a mile away, and was a practical, no-nonsense type who showed up on foot with a camping backpack and a look on her face, like she was prepared to do whatever was necessary and ask questions later. 6 adults, 1 teenager, 1 pregnant woman, 1 elderly beagle. That was our group. We went down the hatch at dusk. The first night was strange in the way that all massive ruptures from normal life are strange. Part of your brain keeps trying to tell you it isn't real. I lay on one of the cots, listening to the generator run and thinking about Dale Hoffmeister's caliper, which was still seized in my shop. I thought about Donna Faulkner at her register. I thought about the open door at the Patterson farm. I didn't sleep much. Nobody did, I think. The hatch above us was closed and locked from inside. Grandpa had installed a secondary bolt for exactly this purpose years ago, though he hadn't mentioned that detail until he demonstrated it with a kind of matter-of-fact efficiency that made everyone feel better and worse simultaneously. The second day, Grandpa ran a radio check on the hand crank unit. The emergency broadcast was still going, but the nature of it had changed. Less instruction, more desperation in the underlying structure. Even though the voice reading it was still working hard to stay neutral. The word quarantine was being used now. The word fatality appeared, carefully phrased as individuals who have succumbed. The word attack appeared once and then didn't appear again. Jim Henderson set himself up as a kind of self-appointed systems manager, which I think was his way of managing his fear. He went through the generator's setup thoroughly and made a schedule for fuel use. Ruth got into the food supplies and started doing actual math. Calories per person per day, projected shelf life of each item, realistic rationing scenarios. I respected that. She was the kind of person who, when confronted with something terrifying, immediately starts measuring it. I spent the second day making a list of what we needed that we didn't have. It was a long list. Clean water beyond the stored supply. The pump in the bathroom worked, but Grandpa said the well it drew from would need monitoring. Medical supplies beyond basic first aid. Kathy was 8 months pregnant, which none of us were trying to say out loud as the pressing issue that it was. Fuel. If we were down here longer than the generator fuel lasted, we'd have cold and dark. More food. Ruth's math said what we had could sustain 8 people for about 6 weeks if we were strict. After that, problem. Antibiotics. Grandpa had a bottle of amoxicillin that was 2 years past its date and nothing else. I made the list and I looked at it and I thought, okay, so someone has to go get these things. The someone was obviously going to be me. I was 23 and knew how to fix things and drove well and was not 8 months pregnant or elderly or a teenager. The logic was uncomfortable, but it was logic. On the evening of the second day, I told Grandpa I was going out in the morning. He didn't argue. He looked at the list. He nodded. "Henderson's place first," he said. "Jim's truck has a better bed than ours, then the pharmacy, then the tractor supply if it's accessible. They keep fuel in bulk. Come back before dark. Don't linger anywhere." "Don't linger. Got it." "Ray." He put his hand on my shoulder, which he almost never did. "You are not a soldier. Don't try to be one. Go fast. Stay quiet. Come back." I slept better that night. Not good, but better. Sometimes having a plan is enough to let your body rest. In the morning, I went up the ladder alone. I opened the hatch slowly. I didn't know what I was expecting. Some kind of immediate horror show, maybe, the way things look in movies. But the workshop was just the workshop. Morning light through the dusty windows, tools on the pegboard where I'd left them. I stood still and listened. Wind outside. A bird somewhere, which struck me as almost aggressively normal. No sound of anything else. I moved to the small window on the east side and looked out at the yard. Nothing. The farm looked like the farm. I went to the door to the outside and eased it open and stood in the gap. The smell was worse than yesterday, but still distant, and I could hear something, far off, in the direction of town. A kind of low, irregular sound that I couldn't identify specifically, just that it existed. I took Grandpa's old Dodge flatbed. The shop truck was faster, but the Dodge had the heavy suspension, and I had an idea about what I might want to carry. I drove slowly down the farm track to the road and paused. Clear. Both directions clear. I turned toward the Hendersons' place. Their truck was in the driveway, a 2004 Ram 2500 diesel. Good condition because Jim was the kind of person who kept things good condition. I'd serviced it twice in the last year. The keys were hanging by their back door, which Jim had told me before we went underground. I switched trucks, left the Dodge in their driveway, and headed for town. The pharmacy was the issue. It was on Main Street, which was the center of town, which was where I most didn't want to be. But it was what it was. Main Street of Garfield Creek, Wyoming, on what was now day 3 of whatever this was. It was not the same as 2 days ago. 3 cars had been abandoned in the middle of the road, not crashed, just stopped at odd angles, like people had gotten out of them quickly and hadn't come back. The hardware half of Faulkner's had a broken front window. I could see glass on the sidewalk and something dark on the wall inside that I decided not to look at longer than I had to. There were 2 of them in the street. That's the first time I saw them with my own eyes, not through news footage, not through someone else's account. 2 of them. One was Tommy Gillies, who worked at the gas station and had gone to school with me. He was in the street about 60 yards away. He was moving in a way that didn't look like walking. It was walking, technically. The mechanics of it were walking. But the quality of it was wrong, like someone doing an impression of walking after watching a video of it without sound. His head was tilted. His left arm hung in a position that suggested the shoulder joint wasn't working right. He didn't see me, or if he did, the information didn't process the same way it would have before. The other one was a woman I didn't recognize. She was nearer to Faulkner's, crouched over something in the doorway, and I didn't look at what she was crouched over. I pulled the truck over and shut the engine. Sat. Watched Tommy Gillies move down the street. He was responding to sounds, I realized. There was wind and something creaking. That shutter I mentioned before, a window shutter that had been broken for years somewhere on the block. And Tommy was moving toward the creaking. Not intelligently, not looking around and deciding. Moving toward the sound the way water moves downhill. Pure stimulus. That told me something. That told me something I filed away immediately. I got out of the truck as quietly as I could, left the door open so I wouldn't have to close it, moved to the pharmacy on the other side of the street. The pharmacy door was locked. I stood there for 2 seconds, and then I picked up a rock from the decorative planter outside and put it through the corner of the glass panel next to the door, as quietly as possible. Which is to say, not quietly at all. The woman by Faulkner's door snapped her head up. Tommy Gillies stopped and turned. I reached through, unlocked the door, and got inside in about 4 seconds. The pharmacy was empty of people. I went to the back. I grabbed everything in the prescription antibiotic section: amoxicillin, doxycycline, ciprofloxacin. A few others I grabbed based on recognizing the names. I grabbed the full first aid supplies, the good stuff behind the counter. Trauma bandages, not just the little adhesive ones. Antiseptic in bulk, over-the-counter painkillers, several bottles, antihistamines. I grabbed the prenatal vitamins when I thought of Kathy, and then grabbed every bottle on the shelf. I filled a large duffel I found behind the counter. The woman from Faulkner's door was now at the pharmacy window. Her face against the glass, her hands flat on it. She wasn't pressing hard, just standing there with her face on the window and her mouth open a little. She wasn't looking at me specifically. Her eyes were tracking to the sounds I was making. But she was close enough that she'd hear me open the door. Tommy Gillies was somewhere I couldn't see. I went to the back of the pharmacy. There was a staff exit to the alley behind the building. I went out that way, eased the door shut, stood in the alley. Truck was 100 yards around the corner. Okay, think. I picked up a bottle I'd taken, an empty prescription container I found in my jacket pocket from God knows when, and I threw it the other direction down the alley. It made a good clattering noise. The woman at the front of the pharmacy, who I could hear shifting against the glass, moved. I heard her footsteps, uneven, wrong rhythm, going toward the sound in the alley. I went the other way, got back to the truck, got in, started the engine, which was too loud, and I hated it, and I pulled out and left Main Street going the back way, parallel to the highway. The tractor supply was on the edge of town, away from Main Street, and it was in better shape. Nobody in the parking lot. Front door locked. I went through a side loading bay that the guys who worked there had always kept unlocked because it was easier for deliveries. Inside it was dark and smelled like fertilizer and hay, which smelled like nothing was wrong because fertilizer and hay smell like nothing is wrong. I found the fuel area. Tractor Supply keeps diesel in bulk containers, big yellow jerrycans, 20-gallon units. I loaded 4 into the truck bed. I also grabbed 2 propane tanks, a camp stove, extra water filtration units, a handsaw, and a bolt cutter on impulse. The kind of impulse that I later felt very smart about. On the way out, I passed the generator display. There was a Honda EU2200i sitting there. Dual fuel, relatively quiet. Price tag said $1,100. I loaded it into the truck. On the drive back, I heard something on the radio. Not the emergency broadcast, but cutting through it. A different signal, cleaner, something that sounded like it was coming from a specific transmitter rather than the broad emergency system. A voice, a man's voice, saying coordinates. A long string of numbers, then a word, Yellowstone, then the coordinates again. Then it cut out and the emergency broadcast came back. I drove the rest of the way home with that repeating in my head. When I got back, Jim and Tyler helped me unload. Ruth went through the medical supplies with an efficiency that confirmed she'd had first aid training somewhere. Grandpa stood at the top of the ladder looking at the generator. "Honda," he said. "Dual fuel," I said. "Quieter than ours." He looked at me. "Good. We got it down." Jim set it up. The rest of that day felt almost functional. People moving with purpose, things getting organized, the small wins of increasing our supply producing a mood that was something like relief, if a much more provisional version of relief than normal. That evening, Grandpa told me about the coordinates. Not because I brought up the radio, because he already knew about that frequency. He sat me down at the folding table while the others were eating, and he said, "There's something I've been thinking about, whether to tell you. Is it about a transmission on a specific frequency that mentions Yellowstone?" He paused. "You heard it. On the drive back." He nodded slowly. "The bunker system I worked on. It wasn't just this one. There were 11 built across the region, what they called a tertiary network. Not military command, not civilian shelter exactly. Emergency infrastructure, water, comms, medical. The idea was that if the primary and secondary systems failed, there'd be nodes out here that could support rebuilding. And Yellowstone. One of the nodes is near the park. Not in the park. The geology's wrong for underground construction there, obviously. But near the eastern boundary, a larger facility built to serve as a coordination point. The signal on that frequency means it's operational. I sat with that. Operational means people. Operational means something. Could be automated, could be people. The signal's on a rotation that suggests manual input, not a pure loop. He folded his hands. It's about 280 miles. On roads that might not be passable. Yes. With 8 people, one of whom is about to have a baby. 8 people and a dog, he said. And he said it so flat that it was somehow funny. And I laughed in spite of everything, and he almost smiled. We didn't make any decisions that night. What we made instead was another supply run for the following day. Because Ruth's math was sitting in my head, and 6 weeks of supplies wasn't enough if we were going to be here a long time. And it definitely wasn't enough if we were going to travel anywhere. Day 4, I went out again. This time Tyler came with me. I hadn't planned that. He'd asked the night before, with the specific seriousness of a 16-year-old who knows he's going to be told no and is trying to preempt it. I said I'd think about it, and then I thought about it. And the honest truth was that another pair of eyes and hands was genuinely useful. And Tyler was a smart kid. Quiet, observant. Jim had said he'd grown up on his family's farm in Nebraska and knew machinery, knew how to work. That meant something. But mostly I think I said yes because of the way he'd asked, like he needed to be useful. I understood that feeling. We took the Ram again. This time I drove wider around town, went instead to 2 things I'd been thinking about. First, the grain elevator on the south side of the county road, which was technically off the farm supply grid, but I knew the family that ran it, the Breckinsons, and I knew they kept a stock room. Second, after that, I wanted to look at the big hardware store out by the highway junction. Not Faulkner's combined operation in town, but the proper standalone hardware store that had opened 6 years ago, which had fuel and tools and the kind of things you needed if you were going to make infrastructure work. The grain elevator first. The Breckinsons weren't there. The main building was locked, but the storage annex, a big metal outbuilding, was open. The rolling door left about 4 feet up. The family had clearly left in a hurry. Inside, bags of grain. Yes. but also processed food stores, the kind farming families keep as a matter of habit. Canned vegetables in bulk, dried beans in 40-pound bags, cornmeal. I thought about the weight and the truck's capacity, and we took what made sense. Tyler worked fast and without complaint. He didn't try to talk much, which suited the situation. We were loading the third bag of dried beans when we heard it. Footsteps. Outside on the gravel. Not the wrong rhythm footsteps of someone infected. These were normal. Too cautious to be normal, actually. The careful tread of someone trying not to be heard, which is a very specific sound once you're listening for it. Tyler heard it too. He looked at me. I held up my hand. Stay still. A woman appeared in the gap of the rolling door. She was maybe 40, short hair, wearing a canvas jacket that was torn at the sleeve, and had what I was pretty sure was dried blood on the shoulder. She had a hunting rifle slung across her back, and she was holding a kitchen knife in one hand, in a way that suggested she'd been holding it for a long time and had gotten used to the weight. She saw us. She stopped. Nobody moved for a full 3 seconds. "You from here?" she said. "Farm north of town," I said. "You?" "Passing through." Her eyes went to the bags we'd loaded. "You taking all of that?" "Not all of it." A pause. She looked at Tyler, then back at me. "I've got 2 kids in a car out front. We've been driving from Gillette. The highway, the 25, it's gone. They've blocked it, both ends of a 40-mile stretch. I don't know what's happening in there. We came across on county roads. Gillette was 100 miles east. If the highway was blocked in both directions across 40 miles, that was something I didn't want to think too hard about. "Are your kids okay?" I said. "Hungry, scared." Her jaw tightened. "Same as me. What's your name?" "Deborah Pine." "Ray Kowalczyk." I picked up a bag of beans. "Take what you need." She stared at me. "Just like that. There's enough here that we don't need to fight about it. Where are you trying to get to?" "Anywhere that isn't where I've been." I thought about this for approximately 2 seconds. "We have a place. Secure. My grandfather built it. We have food and water and a generator. It's not perfect, but it's safe." Tyler gave me a look I pretended not to notice. "Why would you offer that?" Deborah said. It wasn't quite a question. More like she was saying it to test what I'd do. "Because you've got 2 kids," I said. "And because your rifle makes me feel better about the situation." She almost laughed. "The rifle makes you feel better. We could use someone who knows how to use one." We brought Deborah and her kids, a girl named Cassidy who was 11 and a boy named Owen who was 8, back to the farm. They'd been in her car 3 days. The kids ate immediately, fast and focused, and Kathy Henderson sat with them without being asked to and talked to them in a low, easy voice while they ate. And I thought, this is what humans do, even now. That was day 4. Day 5 through about day 11 were a kind of new normal that wasn't really normal at all, but had the shape of routine. The supply run pattern continued. I went out every second or third day, sometimes with Tyler, sometimes with Jim, never alone after the first time. The town of Garfield Creek was increasingly not safe. The infected population in it was growing in a way that suggested people had been coming in from outside rather than the town just declining from within. There were too many faces I didn't recognize. Bodies moving through the streets. They moved toward sound and ignored everything else. They didn't organize. They didn't plan. One of them had been standing on the same street corner for 2 days because there was an air conditioning unit on the hardware store that made a continuous low hum and it just stood there responding to the hum, head tilted, not going anywhere. That was what they were. They weren't thinking. They were just reacting, over and over, to the loudest or most recent sound. Once I understood that completely, I was less afraid of them, which I realize sounds like the wrong thing to feel. But understanding something reduces its power over you. What continued to scare me was other people. On day 6, I came across the remains of what I can only describe as a camp. On the edge of the county road about 4 miles out, someone had pulled 3 trucks into a loose circle and set up a perimeter. I could see it from a distance. The trucks, a fire ring, some crates, camping equipment. No people. When I got closer, I saw why there were no people. I turned around and went back. On day 8, Jim picked up a CB radio transmission from someone claiming to be running a protected zone in a town called Morrow, which was about 30 miles south. The voice on the CB was male, confident, and said that anyone was welcome to come in and be added to the population under certain conditions. The conditions were vaguely stated. The tone was the thing that bothered me. Jim wanted to investigate. Grandpa said no. Ruth said no. I said no. Jim argued that we couldn't know for sure. Ruth said, "When someone offers you safety under conditions they won't specify in full, you don't find out what the conditions are." Jim backed down. On day 9, Kathy Henderson's water broke. We had a situation. Nobody in our group was a doctor or midwife. The medical supplies I'd gotten from the pharmacy included the basics, but nothing that covered a complicated childbirth. Ruth turned out to have done a wilderness first aid course that included emergency delivery, which was not nothing but was also very much not the same as being trained for this. The birth took 6 hours. It was loud and it was hard, and I spent most of it outside the improvised, curtained-off area we'd made from tarps and sleeping bags, sitting on the floor of the bunker's corridor listening and trying not to think. At the end of it, there was a different kind of sound. A baby? A girl. Jim named her Clara after his grandmother. She weighed what Ruth estimated as about 7 pounds, was small but healthy-looking, had a strong cry that immediately worried me in a practical sense, given our need for quiet. And then didn't worry me at all, because she was a baby that had just been born in a bunker during the end of the world, and she had every right to cry as loud as she wanted. Grandpa held her for about 30 seconds, very carefully, with the posture of a man who has held babies before, and his face did something I'd only seen it do twice before in my life. "Named after your grandmother too, Clara," he said. To her, quietly. I had to go to the other side of the bunker for a few minutes. By day 12, things had shifted. The group was cohering. We had a rhythm, roles, responsibilities. But 2 things were building pressure. One was Deborah Pine. She was useful and she was practical, and she was also, underneath all of that, a person under a very specific kind of strain. She'd gotten her kids safe, yes. But she didn't know about her husband. He'd been on a work trip to Rapid City when everything started, and she'd had no contact since. Her kids were holding up in the way kids hold up, which is partly better than adults and partly much worse. And the fact that Cassidy had stopped eating full portions wasn't something any of us missed. I talked to Deborah one evening, just the 2 of us at the folding table while everyone else slept or pretended to sleep. "I keep thinking he found somewhere," she said, not looking at me. "There's no reason to think that. I just keep thinking it." "You can't know you're wrong," I said. She looked up. "That's a strange thing to say." "It's the true thing." She was quiet for a bit. "You're not much for comfort." "I'm bad at it," I said. "Sorry. No, She stopped. Actually, it's fine. Everyone else keeps trying to tell me it'll be okay. You're the only one who just acknowledges that it might not be. It might not be, I said. But also, it might. Yeah. She looked at her coffee, which was cold by now. Yeah. The second source of pressure was a man I haven't mentioned yet, because he came to us on day 9, after everything with Clara. And I was still sorting out how I felt about him. His name was Gary Whitfield. Gary was 51, had run the propane supply company in Garfield Creek for 15 years. He'd come to the farm on foot. I'd been up top doing a check, and he'd come walking up the road looking like 3 bad days compressed into one person. Lean, pale, eyes that had stopped sleeping. He said he'd been hiding in his supply depot when Garfield Creek got overrun and had finally run out of food and needed somewhere. I brought him in. And Gary was fine. He was helpful. He knew propane systems better than anyone, which was genuinely valuable, and he worked without complaint. But there was something about him that kept my attention slightly uneasy. Not anything I could point at, just a quality to the way he listened to conversations without appearing to listen. The way he asked questions about the bunker layout, the exits, the hatch mechanism, phrased as casual curiosity. Maybe that was just what trauma did to people. Maybe he'd been alone too long and was compensating. I kept the feeling and set it aside. Day 14. The radio got stranger. Not the emergency broadcast, which was still running but had degraded. Longer silences between transmissions, a voice that sometimes stumbled over words it shouldn't have stumbled on. Like the person reading it wasn't sleeping much either. But that other frequency, the one Grandpa had told me about. I'd been monitoring it on a separate unit, and the coordinates were still rotating. But now there was new content. A voice different from the first one. A woman's voice, saying, "Convoy corridor still active. Highway 14 to 20. Window remains open. All registered nodes authenticate before arrival." Grandpa heard this over my shoulder and went very still. "Registered nodes," I said. "That's the language of the system," he said. "The infrastructure network. Someone's running it." "Who?" "I don't know specifically. But the language means they know the protocols, which means either they were part of the original program or they found someone who was. Or they're using the language to draw people in," I said. He looked at me. "Yes, that too." We talked about Yellowstone, all of us that evening, around the folding table. It was the first time the whole group, all 11 people now, counting baby Clara, sat and actually laid everything out. Ruth's math said 6 to 8 weeks of food remaining. We'd improved that with supply runs, but the runs were getting harder as the town deteriorated. The fuel for the generator was a limit we could calculate exactly. The window where things were manageable was not infinite. The Yellowstone facility, if it was real and operational, was 280 miles. 280 miles of roads we didn't know the state of, through terrain that had maybe a few major towns, any of which could be impassable. Jim said, "We should go." Ruth said, "If the facility is real." I said, "The signal's real. Whether the facility matches the signal is what we can't know without going." Pete Daller, who mostly listened and contributed carefully when he spoke, said, "What's the alternative to going?" Nobody had a great answer to that. Gary Whitfield said nothing. He was in the corner with his coffee, and he said nothing, and I kept noticing that. We decided we'd prepare for a week and then go. 1 week to get vehicles ready, to plan the route, to build up supplies as much as we could manage. That week was mine, mostly. the mechanical part. We had the Ram 2500, which was in good shape. We had Grandpa's old Dodge flatbed. I'd kept both in tune throughout. But 2 vehicles for 11 people plus supplies was tight and fragile. If one broke down, we were in trouble. On day 15, I went to the Hofmeister farm, which was a mile past the Breckensons. Dale Hofmeister had, besides the truck with the seized caliper that was still in my shop, a 2001 Ford Expedition that his wife had driven and that I knew was well maintained. The Hofmeisters had left. The farm was empty, house locked, animals gone, which meant they'd been organized about leaving. The Expeditions was in the barn. Key was not in the ignition. I spent an hour finding it, which I did by doing what you do when you know how farmhouses work. I checked the hooks by the back door, the kitchen drawer, the small dish on the mudroom shelf. Found it in the mudroom dish. Expedition started on the second try. Battery was slightly low from sitting. I ran it for 20 minutes and it came up fine. I drove it back. On day 16, I found something I still don't know entirely what to make of. I was doing a run on the Far County Road, the one that goes east toward the mountain pass, not looking for anything specific, just seeing what was out there, getting a sense of the road conditions before we committed to any route. Tyler was with me. We came around a curve, and there was a vehicle in the ditch. Not abandoned in the careless way, carefully, like someone had deliberately driven it off the road into the ditch and then camouflaged it with cut brush. Military vehicle. Old surplus, probably. One of the M35 deuce-and-a-half cargo trucks. Olive green, canvas cover over the bed. We stopped. Got out. The truck was empty. The engine was cold. It had been there at least a day, probably longer. But the cab was not empty in a meaningful sense. There was a map on the seat. Official looking, printed on heavy paper, with route markings in red pen. And there were handwritten notes on it in the margins that I photographed with my phone, which was useless for calling or internet, but still worked as a camera and flashlight. Before we left, the map showed roads and circled locations, several of them. One was about 60 miles south. One was the junction east of Yellowstone. In the margin next to the Yellowstone junction, Node 7 confirmed, March 19th. This was written before we'd started monitoring that frequency, before we'd even gone underground. Before, which meant someone had been tracking this network before the outbreak got bad enough to go underground, which meant either preparedness or knowledge of what was coming before most people had it. I brought the map back and showed Grandpa. He studied it for a long time. The other circles, he said. The southern one, about 60 miles south near the highway. That's where Node 4 was built. I helped build it. He set the map down. Someone's been cataloging these. Someone who knew. Knew what specifically? He was quiet for a beat too long. Ray, the outbreak. I've been thinking about what I know about biological systems and what I know about the timing of what's happening. The emergency broadcasts before we went down. The speed of it. The geographic spread. He picked up the map again. This wasn't a natural emergence. I sat very still. I'm not saying I know what it is, he said. I'm saying the behavior of it doesn't match what I'd expect from a natural pathogen. The speed, the simultaneity, the fact that the infrastructure system, the node network, has been reactive in ways that suggest someone activated it in advance. You think someone knew? I think someone did this. The silence in the bunker was a specific kind of heavy. Who would do something like this? I said. I don't know. He put the map down flat. But someone has been tracking the nodes, and the Yellowstone facility is the center node, the coordination point. He looked at me, which either means it's the safest place to go, or the most dangerous. I didn't sleep at all that night. Day 17, Gary Whitfield was gone. In the morning when people woke up, Gary wasn't in his spot. His sleeping bag was neatly rolled, his boots were gone, his personal bag was gone. He'd gone up the hatch in the night. Nobody had heard him go. The bolt, I said. I looked at the hatch. The secondary bolt Grandpa had installed was still thrown, but it had been unthrown and rethrown. There was a small smear on the wall near it where someone's fingers had been, where they'd reached in the dark for something they already knew how to find. He knew where the bolt was, Jim said. He asked me about it, Ruth said. She said it quietly, in a way that meant she was also saying she was sorry she hadn't mentioned it before. About a week ago, just asked how it worked. I thought he was just curious. I went to the hatch and opened it and went up. The farm outside was empty. No sign of Gary. No vehicle taken. The trucks were all where we'd left them, which made sense because we kept the keys below. But there were tracks. Boot prints in the soft dirt going east, toward the road. He'd walked out in the night and gone somewhere. This disturbed me on multiple levels, the most practical one being now someone who had been inside our bunker, who knew our location, our population, our supplies, our hatch mechanism, was out there. Somewhere. We didn't know why he'd left, or where he'd gone, or who he might tell. I mentioned the CB radio transmissions from Morrow, the protected zone with unspecified conditions. Jim's face changed when I said that. You think he was... I don't know what I think. I know he was asking questions, and now he's gone. We moved up our timeline. Instead of a week, we had 4 days. Those 4 days I worked on the vehicles harder than I'd worked on anything in my life. The Ram was solid. The Expedition I went through front to back. Oil, coolant, belts, tires, check the spare. I rebuilt the Dodge's carburetor, which had been developing a hesitation I hadn't gotten around to fixing. We loaded the supplies in a distribution that meant if we lost any one vehicle, we wouldn't lose everything. Thirds across 3 vehicles. Ruth organized the non-mechanical prep. Routes, maps, a protocol for if we got separated. Jim rigged the CB radio so we could communicate vehicle to vehicle. Deborah cleaned her rifle and showed Tyler how to reload quickly. Grandpa spent most of those 4 days quiet. He ate less than usual, slept poorly by the sound of it, and spent hours sitting with his coffee and his thoughts. On the 3rd night, he asked me to sit with him, and he told me things I hadn't known. His name before it was Americanized, in the 60s, had been Walenty Kowalczyk. His family had come from Poland in 1949. He'd been 13. His family had survived German occupation and then Soviet occupation, and had made it out because his father had been the kind of person who knew how to hide things and wait. He'd grown up in Wyoming, studied engineering on the GI Bill after Korea, gotten recruited into a government infrastructure project in 1961. The people I worked for, he said, they weren't military. They were adjacent to it. A specific program that existed between the military and civilian government. Its purpose was continuity, preserving the capacity to rebuild. And now? Those people are mostly dead. The program was officially dissolved in 1989. But programs like that don't fully dissolve. People who believed in the work kept working, informally, which is why the nodes are still transmitting. Someone is still operating them. Someone on that truck we found, I said. Someone who had the map. The truck bothers me, he said. The way it was hidden bothers me. Hidden like they didn't want it found. Or hidden like they were leaving it for a specific person to find. I hadn't thought of that. Are we the specific person? I said. That would mean someone knows we're here. He wrapped his hands around his mug. Gary Whitfield would know we're here. I went cold. You think he left the truck? I think he might not have been hiding from something, Grandpa said. I think he might have been doing reconnaissance. Day 21. The morning we were going to leave. We brought everything up from the bunker at first light, organized it in the workshop. The farm was quiet, no infected in visible range, though there was sound from the direction of town that you tried not to think about. The smoke column to the southeast was larger than it had been. 3 vehicles loaded. 11 people, 1 dog. Baby Clara wrapped against Kathy's chest in a carrier Deborah had in her bag that she'd given without being asked. Grandpa stood at the hatch one last time. He looked down into it. Will we come back? I said, though I didn't know why I asked. I don't know, he said. I hope not, because coming back would mean we failed to get somewhere better. He let the hatch down. It locked with a solid final sound. We got in the trucks. I took the Ram, leading. Jim took the Expedition in the middle. Grandpa rode with me. Tyler rode with me as well, in the back, with his window cracked so he could hear outside. The first 40 miles were clearer than I'd expected. The county roads were empty. We moved at 45 miles an hour, fast enough to cover ground, slow enough to react. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of Wyoming morning that exists in September, all low light and long shadows. Through the windshield, the mountains west of us were exactly as they'd always been, which felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. We stopped once in the first stretch at a farm with a diesel pump. I filled all 3 tanks and the jerrycans we'd brought. Took maybe 15 minutes. Nothing approached. The problem started at the highway junction. Highway 14 to 20, the route the radio had mentioned. The junction was a T intersection with a gas station and a grain elevator and, as of now, 3 vehicles blocking the road. Not abandoned blocking, deliberate blocking. Vehicles pulled sideways across both lanes, the kind of arrangement that takes intent. I stopped the convoy 200 yards back. There were people at the blockade. 6 that I could count, armed, not infected, just people, standing at the vehicles with rifles and watching us. This is the part where we find out if this is a toll booth or a trap, Tyler said from the back. He wasn't wrong. I told Jim and Deborah on the CB to stay back, stay running. Then I drove forward alone. When I got close enough that they could see my hands on the wheel, I stopped and rolled the window down. The man who walked toward me was maybe 45, heavy-set, wearing a hunting vest and carrying a lever-action rifle in the crook of his arm. His face was not unfriendly, but it was watchful. "Where are you heading?" he said. "East," I said, which was technically true of our current direction. "Trying to get out of the valley." "How many in your group?" "Several. Family and neighbors." He looked at the Ram, then looked back at the 2 vehicles he could see in the distance. "That's not several worth of trucks." We had to figure out how to carry what we needed. He studied me. "You're coming from Garfield Creek direction. South of it. You know a man named Gary Whitfield?" Something went very still in my chest. I kept my face the same. Should I? The man watched me for 3 seconds. He came through here 4 days ago. Said there was a secure location back that way. Said he was bringing people to us. Nobody's come. I don't know anyone named Whitfield, I said. Another 3 seconds. He looked back at his people at the blockade and then back at me. Road's open. You've got 90 minutes before dark. Get past Worland before then. Worland's gone. He stepped back. Good luck. The blockade vehicles moved, enough to get through. I drove past. My hands on the wheel were not steady. He was looking for us, Grandpa said, very quietly. Gary told them there was a secure location. He was bringing them to us, and then he didn't bring them. I drove through the gap. Why didn't he bring them? Because someone else got to him first, Grandpa said. Morrow, the protected zone, the voice on the CB with the conditions. He went to them, I said, and they didn't let him come back. Or he's with them by choice. But I didn't say that part out loud. Worland was bad. We'd been warned, and we still weren't ready for it. The highway goes straight through Worland, and we could have gone around, but the around route added hours we didn't want to add, and I made a decision I still think about. I drove us through. Worland is a town of about 5,000 people, or had been. The downtown was burning, not fully, not the whole thing, but buildings on fire and nobody putting them out. Smoke and black columns, and the smell of it getting into the cab, even with the windows up. The highway through town was not clear. There were abandoned vehicles, and there were infected, more than I'd seen in Garfield Creek by a significant margin. And the infected were doing what they did, responding to sound. And our engines were sound. Don't stop, Grandpa said. Whatever happens, don't stop. I didn't stop. I drove at 20 miles an hour through gaps in the abandoned vehicles, steering around them, and when I couldn't steer around them, nudging them out of the way with the Ram's bumper. The infected tracked us. They followed the engine sound. But they followed at walking speed, and I was moving at 20 and 20 beats, walking every time. 2 of them got in the way. I didn't slow down. You don't slow down. In the expedition, Jim had to steer over a curb onto a sidewalk for about 30 feet. He did it. In the Dodge, Deborah held the line and kept pace. We came out the other side of Worland in about 8 minutes. 8 minutes that felt like they took something from each of us. On the far side, we stopped at the first wide shoulder and everyone got out. Not because anything was wrong, but because everyone needed 30 seconds of standing still and breathing outdoor air. Tyler sat down on the truck's running board and put his face in his hands. Not crying, just recovering. Deborah's kids were pressed against each other in the expedition. Kathy was murmuring to Clara, who'd been quiet during the whole thing in the way babies sometimes are, like they're reading the room. Pete Dowler came to stand next to me. You drove well, he said. I drove fast, I said. That's the same thing in that situation. He patted my arm once and went back to the expedition. We made 80 miles that day before I called a stop. There was a rest stop at the edge of an agricultural area, a big covered pavilion, cement floor, a functioning bathroom that we tested and found still had water pressure. We pulled the trucks in under the pavilion and cut the engines. Night, wind, stars, a massive quantity of them, because no city lights anywhere in range. Jim set up a watch rotation, 2 hours each, 3 people rotating. I took the first shift, sitting in the Ram's cab with the window cracked, listening. It was during my watch that I heard the other vehicle. A diesel engine, distant. Then closer, coming from the west, from behind us. I watched the road. The truck came into view, not military, a civilian pickup, black, moving at speed. It didn't slow down when it passed the rest stop. It kept going east. 2 minutes later, another vehicle. Different make. Same general direction, a convoy behind us. I woke Grandpa. He sat with me for 10 minutes, watching the road. 2 more vehicles passed in that window. They're following the same route, I said. Following, or paralleling, he said. The highway's the only reasonable route here. One of those trucks, I said. Second one. I saw a CB antenna. He thought about that. We should move. It's dark. They're moving at night, which means they're not concerned about the road, which means they know it. We woke everyone and moved. No headlights. I drove by the running lights only. Slower, staying on the highway shoulder. Grandpa had a compass out and watched our direction. The moon was up, enough to make out the road. We drove for 3 hours. At around 2 in the morning, we came to a locked gate across a gravel road leading off the highway. A sign on the gate that, in my running lights, I could barely read said, "Federal land, no trespass," and zip-tied to the gate, a piece of orange surveyor's tape. Grandpa said, "Stop, stop the truck." He got out. He walked to the gate in the dark. He looked at the orange tape for a long time. He touched it. "What is it?" I said. "Orange," he said. The original installation team used orange markers for active nodes. He touched it again. "This is the turn." I looked at the locked gate. I got out and looked at the lock. It was a heavy padlock, new-looking. Then I went back and got the bolt cutters I'd grabbed from Tractor Supply on impulse 3 weeks ago. The lock came apart in one squeeze. The gravel road went about 3 miles before it opened into something I still find hard to fully describe. A valley, narrow, between 2 ridges. And in the valley, not visible from any highway, tucked against the northern ridge, a cluster of structures. Low profile, mostly underground, with only ventilation pipes and a few communications antennas above grade. And lights. Not many, but some. Electric lights. Parked outside, several vehicles. Military surplus mixed with civilian, people moving between structures. A woman came toward us with a flashlight pointed at the ground, not at us, which I took as deliberate. She was being non-aggressive with the light. She stopped about 20 feet away. "Who are you?" she said. "Walter Kowalczyk," Grandpa said, stepping forward. "I worked on Node 4 and Node 6 under the program. This is my grandson, Ray. We have 11 people." Silence. Then she said, "Node 4. That's... Okay. Come forward slow, all of you." We came forward. Her name was Dr. Anita Mercer, and she was the one who'd been sending the transmissions. She was 56, a former CDC epidemiologist who had been attached to the continuity program in an advisory capacity for 15 years. She'd activated the network when she'd first seen the pathogen data, 3 days before the public broadcast started. 3 days before. She'd known. We were inside one of the structures, warm, concrete, lit by a combination of solar and generator. When I finally asked her about it, not because I wanted to be accusatory, because I had to understand. "You knew 3 days before," I said. She didn't flinch. "I had preliminary data 3 days before. Not confirmation. I activated as a precaution. The people in Garfield Creek," I said. "The people who died in those 3 days." "Yes," she said. "Just yes. No softening." "I know. And the truck," I said. "On the county road east of Garfield Creek, camouflaged in the ditch with a map." She looked at me sharply. "You found it. Was it left for us?" She glanced at Grandpa. "It was left for Walter. If he was monitoring the frequency, we assumed he'd send someone to look. The map was contingency." "You knew about our bunker?" "We knew about all remaining nodes. Your grandfather's farm was flagged as a probable shelter location. She folded her hands. We couldn't come to you. We were establishing this facility. We needed to know if the route was passable. We showed you it was passable, I said. Yes. I sat with that for a minute. And the convoy behind us on the highway. The trucks running at night. Also headed here, she said. From a different starting point. People who got the signal from another node. And the protected zone in Morrow, the one on the CB. Her expression changed. Tell me about that. So I did. I told her about the CB transmission, about Gary Whitfield and the questions he'd asked and his disappearance, about the man at the road blockade looking for him, about my suspicion that Gary had gone to Morrow and not come back. Mercer was very still while I talked. When I finished, she said, Morrow is a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that has been systematically looting other survivor groups and conscripting people into their population. They've been tracking radio signals, node signals. She looked at the map on the wall behind me, the one with the marked locations. They know about this facility. Gary Whitfield told them. Gary Whitfield didn't know about this facility specifically, but he gave them enough, and they'll find the rest. She stood up. They're probably already moving. So, there it was. We'd come 280 miles, through a burning town and a blockaded highway and a night drive without headlights. And we'd found the place, the real place, with power and structure and people who knew things. And it wasn't safe here either. The threat had a name now. Not just the infected, which were a force of nature, but people who were using the collapse deliberately. That night, the first night at the facility, I sat outside on a concrete step in the cold and looked up at the mountains, tried to think about all of it. Tyler came and sat next to me. He didn't say anything for a while. What happens now? He said eventually. I don't know, I said. But you have an idea. I looked at him. He was 16, which had felt young 3 weeks ago, and felt like something else now. He'd loaded bags of grain in a barn while a stranger held a knife. He'd ridden through Worland without making a sound. He'd done his watch shifts without complaint. I have the start of an idea, I said. That's usually how it starts, he said. The next morning, I went to find Dr. Mercer. What the facility had. 53 people total, now counting our group. Medical equipment, communications, stored food for several months. A water system, maps, and intelligence on the surrounding region. 3 people with formal military background, retired or former. 2 doctors, a structural engineer. What the facility lacked? Mobility. Everything here was built to be fixed. If Morrow came, and Mercer believed they would, in force within a week. There was no good defensive position. The structures were designed for concealment, not defense. I looked at the maps. I looked at the vehicles. I talked to Mercer, to Jim, to Deborah. I talked to Grandpa for a long time. What I kept coming back to was something Grandpa had said years ago, when I'd asked him once why he stayed in Garfield Creek when most people our age left for cities. He'd said, "The people who are worth knowing are the ones who stay where they're from until there's a real reason to go somewhere else. The ones who leave just to leave. They don't build anything. They consume things. There's a difference." I'd thought that was old man conservatism at the time. Now I thought he was saying something about choosing your commitments carefully. Staying where you can do something until you genuinely can't. We had done something in Garfield Creek. We'd kept 11 people alive. We'd run supplies, fixed vehicles, kept the generator going, managed the personalities and the fear. We'd done that. And now we could do something here. I talked to the 3 people with military backgrounds. 2 were retired Army, a man named Philip Burke, 62, former logistics officer, and a woman named Sandra Hewitt, 55, former military police. The 3rd was a former Navy corpsman named Douglas Fain, who was now the facility's primary medic. The group from Morrow, Mercer told us, had been running in a force of 20 to 30 people, heavily armed, traveling in multiple vehicles. They moved fast and they took what they wanted. But they weren't military, and they weren't coordinated in any formal sense. They rely on being the most aggressive thing people have encountered, Sandra Hewitt said. Take out that advantage and they're just people. How do you take out that advantage? I said. You don't wait for them to come to you, she said. I thought about Tommy Gillies on the street corner, following the hum of an air conditioner. I thought about sound and stimulus and reaction, about what had worked in Garfield Creek, not fighting, not hiding, moving smarter. We can't fight them, I said. We shouldn't fight them. No, Sandra agreed. But if they're tracking signals, I said, they can be led. Mercer looked at me across the table. The Node 4 facility, I said. 60 miles south. The signal there, is it still broadcasting? Mercer checked her equipment. Node 4 is transmitting on the secondary frequency. Has been since I activated the network. And Morrow is tracking node signals. Yes. So, if we broadcast a stronger signal from Node 4, they'd move toward it instead of here, Mercer said. And while they're moving toward an empty building 60 miles south, I said, we move, get off this frequency, get dark, relocate to somewhere they don't know about. Philip Burke said, you'd need someone to transmit from Node 4 manually to make it convincing. And then get out, I said. And then get out. I looked at the maps. The roads between here and Node 4. The roads from here going north, toward the Yellowstone corridor, where there were other facilities Mercer knew about, smaller but accessible. The distance, the timing. It was a plan with real problems. It required people to go to Node 4, which was in territory we hadn't scouted. It required the convoy from this facility to move, while Morrow was distracted. It required the Node 4 team to get out before Morrow arrived. It also required the vehicles to be in good shape. That was my job. Over the next 4 days, I worked on every vehicle in the facility. 12 vehicles total, ranging from serviceable to marginal. I fixed what I could fix, and I was honest about what I couldn't. 2 vehicles I said flat out were not making this trip. Philip Burke, who turned out to know enough about basic mechanics to be useful, worked alongside me for most of it. Gary Whitfield appeared on day 3, not in person, on the CB radio, his voice, asking for Dr. Mercer by name, asking about the facility's location. Mercer didn't respond. She shut the transmission channel and looked at me. He knows your name, I said. He knows a lot of things, she said. Things that Gary Whitfield shouldn't know, which means either he's been with people who have access to program records, or... She stopped. Or he was never just a propane supplier from Garfield Creek, I said. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She looked at the radio. Does he know about Node 4? I said. Probably, she said. Which means we need to move the timeline up. We moved the timeline up. On the 5th day since arriving at the facility, we ran the Node 4 operation. I drove. I took Douglas Fain and Sandra Hewitt, because they were the people whose competence I trusted most in a situation that might go wrong fast. We went in one vehicle, the Ram, which I knew better than anything else. And we went at night, headlights on this time because speed mattered more than concealment. Node 4 was what Grandpa had described, a concrete structure dug into a hillside, disguised as an agricultural storage unit from the outside. The inside was cold and dark, but functional. The radio equipment was old, but operational. Mercer had given us the authentication codes and the frequency. Sandra ran the transmission. She had a voice that could project authority when she needed it to. She broadcast on the signal frequency, in the node network language, a message that amounted to facility fully operational, medical and supply capacity available. All parties proceed to this location. She broadcast it on a 30-minute loop. We waited 2 hours to make sure it was registering on any monitoring system that might be watching. Then we left. 38 minutes after we started back, Douglas Fain, who was watching behind us through binoculars out the rear window, said, "Headlights, on the county road, coming from the south. Multiple vehicles." "How many?" I said. 5, 6, more. Morrow. I drove faster. We made it back to the facility in time to watch the convoy leave. Mercer had organized the departure while we were running the Node 4 operation. Vehicles loaded, people distributed, the facility shut down in a specific sequence that killed the transmitters and the power. When we pulled in, the last of the vehicles was being loaded. We transferred to our own vehicles. We went north, into the corridor that Mercer knew. Roads she'd mapped, routes that stayed off the main highway. Grandpa was in the Ram with me again. He'd slept a few hours while I was doing the Node 4 run, and he looked better than he had in days. His color was better, his eyes clearer. "You did well," he said. "We're not done," I said. "No, but you did well." I thought about the shop, the seized caliper on Dale Hoffmeister's truck, the sign that said Kowalczyk and Sons, the morning that smelled wrong, and the dogs that stopped barking all at once. "I didn't finish Dale's truck," I said. Grandpa made a sound, almost a laugh. "Dale's truck will survive. He's going to want his deposit back." "Raymond," Grandpa said, which was the full name, but not in the annoyed way. In the other way he used it, the one I'd only heard a handful of times. "Dale's truck will be there, or it won't. Either way, you did your job." I drove. The mountains came up around us, enormous and indifferent the way mountains always are, and the road went forward into the dark. In the back seat, Tyler had fallen asleep against the window. His breath fogged the glass in a small regular cloud, disappearing and returning, disappearing and returning. Deborah's truck, second in the convoy, CB crackled once. Her voice came through, low and steady. "Route looks clear ahead. Cassidy and Owen are asleep. We're good." Then Kathy's voice from the expedition. "Clara's awake but quiet. She's looking at the ceiling." Someone in the middle of the convoy, one of the new people from Mercer's facility, a young woman named Blythe, who'd been a paramedic, said, "Stars out up here. A lot of them." And they were. Through the windshield, north of us, an impossible number of stars. Grandpa reached forward and turned on the hand-crank radio, low. Not the emergency broadcast, the node frequency, static, and then underneath it, that repeating signal. The coordinates, the authentication loop, the voice saying the corridor was open. He turned it back off. "Still transmitting," he said. "Yeah." He leaned back in the seat. He looked tired. He looked his age for the first time I could remember. But he was steady in the way he'd always been steady. The way that came not from nothing going wrong, but from having thought years ago about what to do when something did. The people who built those nodes, I said. Did they think it would be like this? He considered it. They thought it would be worse. Nuclear, everything on the surface gone. He looked out the window at the mountains. In some ways, this is better. The world is still there. Just the people are different. Not different, I said. Fewer. Fewer, he agreed. The road went on. The convoy stayed tight. We drove through the night, through the corridor that someone had laid out decades ago in case of the worst. And the worst had come, but we were in the corridor and moving, and that was what you could say. By morning, we'd made it to a location on Mercer's map, an agricultural valley with a creek and structures and a frequency that confirmed we'd arrived where we were supposed to arrive. More people were there. People from other nodes, other groups, other desperate weeks of surviving. One of them, a man standing at the edge of the camp watching us pull in, looked at our convoy and looked at me when I got out and said, "How far did you come?" "From the valley south," I said. He nodded. "We came from the east, Montana. Long road." "Yeah," I said. "Long road." Baby Clara made a sound from the direction of the expedition. Not distress, something else. The sound babies make when they're looking at something new and trying to understand it. Kathy was carrying her out of the car, and Clara was looking up at the morning sky, which was going pink in the east. Biscuit, the beagle, hopped stiffly down from Pete's vehicle and sniffed the new ground methodically. Tyler stretched his arms wide and looked around at the valley and said nothing, which was the right thing. I went to find Grandpa. He was standing at the back of the Dodge, looking north, where the mountains were still dark against the early sky. "Is this it?" I said. "This is something," he said. I stood with him. The shop was 300 miles behind us. The seized caliper on Dale Hoffmeister's truck still waiting. The sign on the building that said Kowalczyk and Sons because changing it cost money, and there was no reason to spend money on a sign. In my jacket pocket, the bolt cutter's key ring, which I'd been carrying because the bolt cutters were still in the truck bed, and the photograph on my phone, the notes in the margin of the military map, the handwriting that had turned out to belong to someone in Mercer's network, a woman named Grace Pollard, who I'd met at the facility and who was now somewhere in this convoy too, having traveled 400 miles from the opposite direction to end up in the same valley. None of it made clean sense. The world didn't make clean sense. But I was here, and Grandpa was here, and the convoy had made it, and Clara was looking at the morning sky. And that was what there was. That was what there was. And for now, that had to be enough to keep working with. I went to start checking the vehicles, because that was my job. That was still my job. And there was work to do.